Hi, I'm Kellyanne Bustuccio with Gracepoint Media, here for an episode of Gracepoint of View. You know, churches and ministries around the country are learning to live a new normal right now. Their doors are closed, their events are canceled, their weekly services are considered unsafe. So in this discussion today, we're going to talk about how do churches and ministries continue on with their mission? How do church leaders continue to get their message out? How do members continue to connect? And how do ministries continue providing the services they provide? We're going to talk about all of those challenges and also offer some real-world solutions. Brainstorm some action items that you can take with you from this conversation today. So as of the morning of this recording, nearly every county in North Texas is now under a shelter-in-place advisory. So we couldn't join in person as we had hoped, but thanks to the power of technology, we can still join in another way. Let me introduce the others here who are joining us. First, let me introduce Wally Makalasari, the CEO of GivethI. GivethI is an online giving app that allows churches and nonprofits to tithe and give with just a few taps on their phone. Next, Pastor Brad Davis, pastor of Denton North Church. Then Lisa Burkhart-Worley, founder and director of Pearls of Promise Ministries. And Jam Robinson, the marketing specialist here at Gracepoint Media. Thanks everybody for joining us today. So my first question is for you, Brad. What are your greatest concerns right now for the survival and the health of your church?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing for us right now is that we're worried about a lot of our fringe people, people who we normally would expect to see at a big gathering that we may have forgotten about or that aren't really tied in or connected very well to other people. And for them to kind of go unnoticed for us is a big deal. And so trying to kind of figure out how to really help them in their faith. Many of them have sort of a mixed faith. They're relying a lot on community partners and people in the church to sort of look out for them, and their relationship with God is kind of shaky. And so for them to be on their own all of a sudden, kind of without people thinking about them or noticing them, we're trying our best, and that's my biggest concern as a pastor, of taking care of those people who really sort of are on the edges, the fringes, whether that's financially, whether that's faith-wise, whatever that is.
And my next question then is for Lisa. Same question. You're not heading up a congregation, a church, but you're leading a ministry. So what are the concerns right now for your ministry?
It's a little bit different, Kellyanne, but we still have to worry about some things. We put on women's conferences each year, sometimes 2 conferences per year, and we had one scheduled for Austin, a Level Up Women's Conference in Austin on May 16th, but because of the situation, because people at that time when we made the decision to postpone, it was down to 10 people, gatherings of 10 that you couldn't do, and of course that affects us. Even gatherings of 50 affect us. We do intimate conferences, 60 to about 120, but we couldn't take that risk, and I don't think people were willing to take that risk to attend a conference, and now we know we could have not done it. So we've had to regroup and we've had to figure out when we're going to do this again, and that's always challenging to reschedule things like this. In addition, we've had to postpone some radio tapings. We do a radio show called A Time to Dream that features people's testimonies, and normally we do record those at an office in Dallas, but of course, because of the situation, we cannot get together and do that. We like to do those in person. We feel like they're more intimate, and we talk about people's stories. And on top of that, we of course do a TV show with Gracepoint Media called Pop Talk, and this one is just reached network level for on a television network, the Faith Unveiled network, and so we're really excited about that. But I'm starting to be a little concerned about April 15th, our next taping date, and I'm hoping that this will all blow over by then. But we may have to do something like what you're doing right now, in a Zoom room to do the show because we just have to adjust. And here's the thing: I've watched Jimmy Fallon, of all people, on the Tonight Show, and I've been watching him and what he's been doing in the midst of this. He is adjusting. He's shooting these shows, from his home, and he's got his child asking him for something, and he's got a dog in there. I mean, it's just real life, and so we're doing what we can do to adjust to be to continue the ministry, and we're all having to adjust. Churches and ministries like mine, huge ministries, we're all having to figure out how do we reach the people now during this season.
And there is kind of a beauty in that. It is a bit of a motto that I've been trying to say in the last couple of weeks, is to adapt and continue, or using your word, adjust and continue. It's possible to let it stop you in your tracks and halt you, but it's best to figure out how to adapt or to adjust and continue on. So people are figuring it out. And
I was going to say one other thing, Kellyanne, on that is that I thought I was going to have all this extra time to clean, I have a book that I want to finish, but really the ministry has stepped up, but it's stepped up in a different way.
So now I want to turn to Wally, CEO of GivethI. Wally, can you tell me what is GivethI and how does it work?
Yeah, so before I actually jump into that, we all find ourselves in this new world where it's all happening in some kind of video chat, whether it's Zoom, Google Hangouts, whatever it is. And for us as an organization, we're spread all over the country anyways. And so it's something we had kind of been doing even pre-COVID. But all of a sudden, we find ourselves in a different situation where it's like you're in these Zoom calls, the kids are not able to go to school, and they pop up on these video calls. And we'll be in company meetings, and we could literally see parents like trying to hold off their kids. Like you can see the hands in the camera, like, hey, don't call me in the camera. And the dogs are coming, and you could hear them in the background. And after a while, we made a policy at the company and say, hey, look, if you're in one of these company meetings and your kid decides to show up in the camera, please don't shoo them away. Bring them on, show them on the camera, introduce them to the rest of the company. We want to get to meet them, we want to know who they are, as much as they want to know who's mommy and daddy working with, right? And so we find ourselves connecting to people who work at our companies in ways in which we had never imagined. We now know what their pets look like. We know what their kids look like. We know their names. We all say hi when they come on camera. So you look at the passages that are coming from this when we talk about social distancing, and quite frankly, we're finding this electronic way of like actually bringing the social part of it together. But back to GivethI. We started GivethI a few years ago, and I might have been one of those people at Pastor Brad's church, and he's just doing his best to inspire me and keep me on my journey of faith. And I would sit there for the hour or an hour and a half, and when it's time to give, I would reach into my wallet. It's nothing but $3 in there, and then I put that into the offering plate. And I promised myself, not Pastor Brad, I would promise myself, hey, next week, I'm going to make it up because I know I had way more than $3 to give. And then I would be in church the next Sunday, and Pastor Brad would be telling me about how they had electronic giving and all these things, and I'm trying to do it from my smartphone. And don't judge me, right? So same church I had gone to for 5 years, go online. I first have to Google the name of the church, and then I have to find which one of the search results I have to pick. And then when I pick the search result, I got to click on giving, and I got to figure out username and password. And you could tell by now I'm a very clumsy guy. I never remember my password, so I have to go back and hit reset password. I'm like, you know what? Forget this. When I go home, I would actually do it this time around. Like when I get home, this is the Sunday, I will do it this time around. And this will go on for Sundays at a time. And after a while, I started getting embarrassed to look at Pastor Brad in the eyes because I'm like, he's doing his part and I'm not. And finally it clicked in my head like, hey, there are these moments where I'm just inspired to give. And it would be nice if I could just have something on my phone where I could just tap, 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 and I'm done. And I don't have to worry about it. And that was how GivethI was born. We currently serve over 30,000 churches and nonprofits in the United States. It is the most downloaded giving app, the most widely used giving app, the most trusted. And obviously, as the CEO, I'm supposed to say all of these things, but it helps when the App Store and Google Play You could go on there and see the reviews, and they speak for themselves. So it makes my job very easy to say these things without feeling like I'm boasting or I'm being a salesman.
Mm-hmm. And hey, if it's working, go ahead and boast for it. Go ahead and boast for what you created.
Well, Pastor Brad and my pastor, and they've instilled the sense of humility in us. And sometimes it's, as people of faith, it's not always the easiest thing for us to do. So, but thank you, Kelly. And now that I have your permission, I can let my pastor know I did get it from you to be as boastful about how GivethI can help with their mission. There we go. There we go.
So my main question for you, though, is what advice do you have for churches and ministries' financial health? And I want to go ahead and add that I don't think anybody on this panel thinks that a church or ministry's finances are the most important thing. But when we're talking about the survival and the health of your church or ministry, the finances cannot be ignored. So what is your advice right now for that?
So very good question. And I think I might speak for a few of us on this call who might have been on the pew seating side. You're not on the pew. Sorry, you're not on the pulpit, you're on the pew. And prior to launching GivethI, for me, the whole concept of what somebody like Pastor Brad might do is, hey, he comes on Sunday, he inspires me. Every now and then I hear a phone call from him checking up on me. And I never really truly appreciated everything else he would do besides Sunday. But now that I work with churches a whole lot more, I really do appreciate that the Sunday part is just a small, tiny snippet of everything that the church does, right? In terms of providing support for the community, in terms of leading people on that spiritual journey, in terms of being that place of refuge, and in terms of being that place of comfort that you could go to and that you can know that no matter what's going on in your world or around you, no matter how easy or difficult you might have it, that there's a place for you where you can always know God's got me. And there's somebody in that place. Often we call them Pastor Brad and other pastors, right? That's in there championing for me and leading me on that journey. So all of a sudden we find ourselves in a new environment where traditional ways of giving that have helped the churches be able to provide all of these auxiliary things to the community is going away. And one of the things we started seeing very quickly is, like Pastor Brad says, look, he's worried about a lot of things that he has to do to continue to provide a sense of community to his congregants. And what we see a lot with a lot of churches is while they're trying to wrestle with that, they're also trying to figure out how am I going to finance everything else that the church has been financing prior to this. And for us, it's been what's been driving us to say, Pastor, on the giving side, we got you. You go do your thing. You go build the community. You go do everything you need to hold the community together and continue to inspire them and continue to lead them in faith and continue to give them hope and continue to pray for them. We got the giving part of this. And because of that, we made GivethI so easy to get started with that we don't try to think about locking you into a contract. There are no monthly or sign-up fees. You go on our website, GivethI.com/sign up. In less than 5 minutes, you can start receiving donations. And we've made the process so extremely easy so that from the giving side of things, we got that covered for you. And you as the pastor, you can focus on shepherding us, leading us on that spiritual journey. And so one of the things that we're saying in these days is, thankfully, social media is there to help make these connections, and tools like Zoom and the rest of them are there. And so the question then becomes, if there's any place where people are listening to me or they're watching me or they're seeking that inspiration from, and it's my voice that is driving that, how do I make sure that I can let the people also know that they can still continue to support us financially there? And so we've provided a bunch of tools that help make it easy for churches to be able to receive contributions through Instagram, Twitter, Facebook Live, YouTube channel. And we provide all of that. It's so easy. You can have that literally deployed in minutes and be ready for your next live broadcast. So we're seeing very interesting ways that things are shaping up. One of the things that we found very interesting on social media over the weekend, we had somebody who had tweeted us and said, hey, I was able to join 3 different services in one Sunday. And I was able to support all 3 different ministries that had the services on. And so if you're one of those churches, one of the other two, so this person enjoyed service, the traditional service of their home church, and then went and enjoyed services from other places online as well. So if you're one of those two other people, you're like, oh, wow, two other churches, you really appreciate that there's an audience out there now that you're able to tap into, and still does not compromise the relationship that that person has with their home church. But at the same time, that one thing that they think they could get from you, you have this opportunity to tap into it. And so I see what's happening these days as this huge revelation of the possibilities for ministry to spread the gospel beyond the walls that we've never imagined, and to be able to gain the financial support that it takes to take the purpose and the mission of the faith community to a whole new heights that we've never imagined.
Now, Jam, I want to go to you. When I asked for your opinions from a marketing perspective of what churches of any size and of any budget, what they could be doing, you started just thinking things off the top of your head and rattling them off one by one. So I know you have a list ready. What are some of your tangible ideas that you have?
Yeah, I have quite a few, and I think there's some that have already come up in our discussion so far. But the thing I would say before we even talk about tools is just to stay really well connected with your congregation in general is the goal, and then encourage communication back. We have a lot of ways to just broadcast a message out, but if we're not trying to think about ways that can be a two-way deal, then I don't think it's going to really get anywhere, and it's definitely not going to meet some of the needs that our congregations have. So there's a ton of tools that are either completely free or are very, very cheap. Social media, I mean, you can do posting in general, which is just broadcasting a message out, but also doing groups like a Facebook group can allow a lot more discussion type interaction with your congregation. And I think that's huge. It's really not hard to do, especially if you already have like an idea of, your congregation, you have a list of them somewhere or whatever. You can get a group up and running pretty quickly. There's also really good chat options now, like Discord and Slack, which are purpose-built for large-scale chatting, which is not, just a group message, but, hundreds of people.
Like when I hear Slack, I think business, not necessarily churches and ministries, but.
Right, exactly.
It can be used for anything that's large-scale, and Discord kind of has an idea, has a more of a reputation based on interests, and not as much workplace, but both of those things can handle a lot of people, which is great because then it's two-way communication, people discussing. You could have a group, specifically your small group now has a group chat on Slack or Discord, and then you also have one for your whole congregation to talk about questions about the sermon or whatever it is. There's a lot of ways to start making the interaction go two ways or multiple ways. And then also there's email marketing, which we use this term email marketing a lot, but really just email newsletter. A lot of churches already have these, but it's a really good way to get good information out to people. This social media is going to be really, really crowded right now more than it usually is, I would say. And so getting good information to your congregation through newsletters, and it's a really good way to do longer form updates. When someone opens an email, you've kind of got their attention for the next little bit. And so you have time to send a longer form update. All of those things I think are really good tools. Video streaming like we're doing now and like a lot of churches are doing for their sermons and worship services. But I would say that the approach here should be to try to best replicate all the categories of communication you normally have and then transfer them over to these new platforms. So you have teaching, you have worship, care and praying for one another, and then also giving. And so if you're not trying to strategically figure out a way to get all of those things into these new digital platforms, you're going to be missing something that your congregation really, really needs. But also, your congregation doesn't want to be only hearing from you about money. So don't just be looking at these different platforms as a way to be like, oh, sweet, we can ask for donations. Not that anybody's saying that, but the idea that we need to have all these channels open and using them for the things that our congregation needs. And once we have those in place and we develop those strategies and start implementing them, talking about giving on those is going to be only natural. whether it's go to this app that we have to give a gift this week, they'll feel like, oh yeah, I'm still getting a lot of value. My church is still really caring for me and investing in me during the week. And now there's these really easy ways for me to give. And that needing to be a holistic approach rather than just trying to figure out a way to get our giving link out to as many people as possible. So those are some of my thoughts right now. And a lot of churches have probably already these things in place in some way. Their usage might just need to adapt to be more personal, more interactive. But I think there's a lot of churches who haven't really used these because they are all in person. And so the good news is that in 2020, these platforms are very, very cheap, easy to use, if not completely free.
You mentioned, I was trying to keep a mental list of all of the actual platforms and tools that you mentioned. For newsletters in particular, I didn't hear you mention a service for newsletters. If a church doesn't have an existing newsletter, what can they use for that? I
would recommend MailChimp. It has a really good free tier that I think is free all the way up until you have like a couple thousand people you're trying to email. So that's a really good one to start with. There's a lot out there, but that's one I would say is really user-friendly and anyone could start on it for free really quickly.
So one of the things that we had actually noticed pre this era that we find ourselves in, this situation that we're going in, is that giving was already happening spontaneously every second of the day on our platform. From the moment people wake up as early as 4 a.m., somebody was giving somewhere to some church somewhere. And one of the things that I try to push faith leaders a little bit. Again, we study this from an academic perspective as well as much as from the technology side. And one of the things that I push faith leaders is to not minimize how much that they've already impacted their congregations. As somebody who's not a pastor, I think about my church at times that my pastor does not even know I am teaching. I am thinking about them. And I encourage all of them to say, hey, look, if we're going to be sending an email newsletter out there, we don't want to make an ask all the time when we send this email newsletter, but make sure your given link specifically, separately from the link to the website, is a part of your signature. Because you just never know what message might resonate with someone when they receive that email. And you want them to be able to receive that message. They're inspired to want to give to you. One click, they could go through the process.
Okay, so the link to where to give, you're suggesting that in your email signature?
That's what we recommend.
Okay.
It's just a standard part of your signature. Every email that's going out there, just like you would have yours sincerely, Wally, and GivethI, and a link to GivethI.com. Yours sincerely, Pastor Brad. You want to support us here today? Here's a link to that. For more information about our services, here's a link to that. Just make that a standard part of your email signature. It's always there.
That's a good tip to make it easy. That's a very good tip. And that's what part of what the discussion is for today. Like I said, to give real tips. So that's a good one. I want to bring this full circle now back to Pastor Brad. I want to ask, what changes have you put in place, or what things are you doing that are working for you right now?
There's a couple things. First, rather than having one person up in front of the audience on our video recordings for Sunday services, we're trying to bring in more people on panels covering a variety of different topics so that people can just see faces they're familiar with, see that it's just not that kind of pastor-centric type of teaching. People get a lot of teaching and a lot of ministry from others. And so that's a big one. One of the ones, as Wally already kind of alluded to, is just the idea that so much of our communication now is more informal. And so we're learning how to be a little bit less professional and just do tasks, and caring more about people's families and seeing them and stopping and knowing that there's not necessarily a timeline to this, but there's let's take a moment and hear from your kids or whatever in these kind of video conferences stuff. Stuff's just not near as clean cut. It's going to require a lot more flexibility and a lot more understanding that life happens. That kind of professional environment that's cut and dried isn't going to work as much in this. So I think that's really helpful, is being able, even just our pastoral staff, sometimes we get big and we don't spend as much time with each other's families and getting to see them and getting to know what's going on, and seeing people in the background making noises, as my background is very noisy right now. Just that's, I think, a huge thing. I think another one, primarily, at least for us, is learning how to ask people directly for gifts. A lot of churches just rely on people to kind of give on Sunday mornings, but whether it's using a platform like Wally is talking about, when we have real specific needs, we're growing and being able to ask people directly, listen, we've got this, we need this taken care of, can you take care of it? And I think a lot of pastors, including myself, have been really passive in that in years past and let money come in, whether in a basket, whether in online giving, but when we can actually direct people and make them, and I think this millennial generation really connects with that, being able to say, this is where my money is going directly. It's not to some fund, building, whatever, but it's to this need that we have. And so we're growing and being able to communicate to people what's necessary and what they need. And listen, I think long term, we're still in this kind of, and I'm going to bring a little bit of my emergency management background into play here. Remember, we're bivocational, so I taught sociology for a decade, did emergency management and things like that. The hardest phase in this recovery stuff is really the recovery phase. You've got 4 phases in this emergency management thing, and right now we're in the mitigation response phase. The next 3 months to 3 years is going to be huge for people to adapt to all of the changes that we didn't recognize have happened in the last 3 months. And that's just really important for us to be able to adapt to that. We as a church run an auto ministry that's separate from our church per se, and we have a lot of needs from people right now who are like, listen, I've got a job, I'm lucky to have a job, it's an essential job, I need my car repaired, we need people to be able to do that. There's just going to be a lot of those kinds of things coming into play, and we've got to be ready to adapt to a lifestyle that some of us are going to be able to get right back into the lifestyle we had, and there's going to be a huge segment of our population that still needs to be taken care of because the lag there is going to be huge. And so we're trying to prepare for that. We've got a lot of people who have a lot of time on their hands. How do we utilize that in ways that really help those people who need it from a recovery standpoint?
And did you say 3 months to 3 years would be that lag time?
Easily. You look at things like Hurricane Katrina or any other major emergency, and this emergency is being compared to at least Katrina. You've got a very, very long recovery time frame, and people are going to be affected for a very, very long time. And so being able to see that and understand that is really, really important. In the recovery stage, people don't see. It's not right up in front of their kind of vision and their plane of thinking. And so that's where most people get, in particular people who I think God has prioritized as people who we need to pay attention to, the orphans and the widows, get left out. And and everyone goes back to business as normal, and those folks have been infected for much longer after that. 3 years is I think a conservative estimate of how long it's going to take for a lot of people to recover from this.
Lisa, I want to turn the question to you now in the standpoint of your ministry. What are you doing? What have you changed? What are you putting into place that's working for you at this time?
Well, we had a little meeting and we said, how in the world can we encourage people at this time? And one of the things that came to us, that we could do something online on Facebook Live, which we've been doing somewhat anyway with our Pop Talk shows, but we decided to do something called Pearls of Encouragement. We were thinking, what do we name this? And what kept coming into my brain was encouragement. People need to be encouraged. And I couldn't come up with anything but pearls of encouragement. And our ministry, of course, is pearls of promise. And so I went first and I asked God, what do you want me to say? And so my subject was, what do we do when we're feeling alone? And so I just prayed for a word from God, and he showed me John, who was exiled to the Isle of Patmos, and he gave me 3 points of how John, what happened to John when he was in his time of isolation and seclusion, and they were great, powerful things. And so this was hopefully a very good word for those who were watching us, and hopefully will continue to watch as that's been saved on our Pearls of Promise page. But every week we're going to do one of these as long as all this lasts. podcast. It may just continue, maybe a regular feature. I don't know. But next week it's going to be, what do I do when I feel scared? What do I feel? What do I do? What do I do when I feel anxious? So these are all things, I think, emotions that people are dealing with right now. And we want to really reach people where they're at. Now, in addition to that, we had our last Pop Talk television show. We had a different topic originally. We were going to do one on finding your identity. Well, guess what? I just couldn't do that. That's not what people were thinking about. That one of the things we have to do is we have to say, okay, we have to change the way we were thinking. We have to change our sermon plan. In fact, our pastor changed his sermon, and I'm so glad he did, because he needed to address this. He had a series going. He changed it. He threw that out. He's addressing this particular situation where people are at. And so we threw that out and we said, we're going to do one about having hope in the midst of COVID-19, in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. And we had a perfect guest on who's a prayer author, my friend Kathy Green. And as you know, we just sat there and we just talked about all these things that are going through our head and how do we have hope? How do we press into scripture during this time? And so these are some of the things that we're doing. Of course, our blogs are changing. We did a newsletter as well. We're also on Slack. I was listening to all these things that we're doing. And so we're trying to keep up with the times, and I'm sure this is going to continue to evolve in our ministry so that we can reach people where they're at. We have a goal of reaching broken women who need a little extra help in finding God's strength, and of course we're reaching men and women through Pop Talk. So right now there's probably going to be a lot of brokenness out there in light of what's going on and what's going to continue to happen as a result of this pandemic.
And we can find your Pearls of Encouragement on Facebook.
Facebook, yes, on the Pearls of Promise Ministries page. And so it's the one that we just did. It's there. And so if anybody needs some encouragement, who's watching today, or any of our panel members wants to see that, I think it's an encouraging word. Really, I can't take any credit for it. It was definitely a divine download. So if anybody wants to watch, please go ahead and watch. And we'll be doing that every week at 11, unless it's a Pop Talk day. Wednesdays on Pop Talk days. Yes.
One more thing that I want to go back to you, Brad, that I thought of just before I went to Lisa. You said that you're doing more for your sermons instead of just streaming one person, you live. You're doing more of a panel discussion. How are you doing that? If someone's listening and wondering, if from a technical aspect, how does that work? What's the platform or the software that you're using to do that?
Well, so right now we're still trying to get people in a kind of living room setting. According to the government's orders, we still have the ability to have fewer than 2 or 3 people in kind of a room, and then to just throw questions their way. Questions that are a little less sermon and a little bit more what people are kind of thinking through. We may get to the point where we have to do more Zoom kind of video type stuff, but a lot of it's just getting people to think through. We're doing a series on emotions and the character of God and through Isaiah 40, and we just want people to sit and kind of think through. We did one on counseling this last week. We'll do one on feeling isolated from God in the weeks to come, emotional idolatry. Yeah, just kind of throwing some questions there. They're really honest questions that people are struggling with. And rather than a sermon type setting where we're really kind of giving them something, we want them to.
And actually, we prematurely, unfortunately, lost Brad, but I think that's just the reality of how we're having to communicate in this time. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that that's okay, because we're continuing on with what we have in this time frame, in this uncertain time frame, and that's the best we can do. Continue on with what we have. Media programs are making this work with live streams and webcasts, and we're doing the same. So thanks to everyone for joining in with us today. I appreciate all of your input because, like I said, we wanted to take away from this discussion real, tangible ideas that we could use today, that churches and ministries could use today. So I appreciate you all weighing in with your ideas. They're going to be very helpful to anyone watching. Thank you so much.
I think it's an authentic moment of the reality of what we're dealing with.
Oh, yes.
When these online conversations children are walking in, internet connection is getting dropped. Zoom can't keep up. If you're outside of the United States, Zoom is like really throttling bandwidth because they can't keep up with the traffic that they're getting. Facebook live videos are disappearing. I mean, this is just the reality of what we're dealing with. I think, again, I'm not the expert you guys are. We can talk about giving. I know a lot about that. This one, I don't know as much. But I think it's a genuine, authentic moment that talks about this is the reality that we're facing with. And it's okay when it happens.